Hi, it's good to have your company. You're listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. My name is Simon Smart. My guest today is Rikk Watts, Professor of New Testament at Regent College in Vancouver in Canada. You'll soon pick up that while he's lived in North America for a long time, now Rikk was originally from Australia and he's back in the country for a few weeks. Good to have you here, Rikk.
G'day, mate.
Now, I was a student, full disclosure, I was a student of Rick's in Vancouver, so it's especially fun for me to have him in today.
It might be fun for me too.
Now, Rikk, you've really had quite the journey, haven't you? You trained as an aeronautical engineer, you've been a scholar at Cambridge and other places, you've worked previously with urban poor and even been a professional drummer. Now, that reads like rich experience.
It was indeed. It was indeed.
And this journey you've been on, we're going to get you to reflect on that, especially in light of your biblical work. Now, you've studied and taught the Bible for many years now. What keeps you interested in that? And many people would think it's a strange thing to dedicate so much energy towards.
Well, the answer is quite simply, it's about life. So I got into aeronautical engineering because I loved aircraft, just poetry in motion. I knew I really married the right woman when at an air show in England maybe 15 years ago, we watched this old B-17 kind of sweep up into the sky, and my wife said, "That's beautiful. I love you," right?
Poetry, right?
Yeah, poetry in motion. So I got into aerodynamics because of that, then discovered it was all math. Ended up working for IBM in systems engineering, and that was great. But I found myself more and more interested in people. And the Bible is just an amazing book when you want to talk about what it means to be a human being. And this is going to sound odd, but it's the richest text I know. Just keep going back to this thing. There's so much going on.
Yeah. Do you ever have your doubts about it and wonder if the whole thing's sort of misled? I know sometimes in an earlier scholarly moment where you were faced with so much critical attention of the Bible, you had a few wobbles then, didn't you?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, none of this stuff at this point is about mathematical proof, but then nothing is. You might remember that movie Contact from many years ago. There's that scene where
Foster, right?
Yeah, Jodie Foster and who's the guy who kind of plays the religious whatever fella.
Can't remember.
Anyway, she's asking for proof, and it's this great scene. The guy really knew what he was doing. She says, "Well, I need proof that God exists." And he gets very quiet. Palmer Joss is the name of the guy in the movie, and he looks at her and it just kind of dials down a bit. And he says, "Did you love your father?" And of course, having watched the movie, she really did. And she says, "Well, yeah, I did." Silence. "Prove it." And she just goes blank. So we're not talking about scientific proof at this point. And you know what? As much as I enjoy that stuff, it can't help you talk about Matisse. Can't help you talk about a good Australian Shiraz. Well, how do you write an equation for that? So I discovered that the really rich stuff in life that makes me who I am, my engineering language didn't help me. And as much as I love science, it doesn't help me either. So I'm not anti-science, but I just think people who put it all in those terms miss some things. So for me, it's much more now about historical probabilities, and I can live with that. Life is like that, right?
You mentioned that you say that the biblical story is all about life. There'd be lots of people who would imagine it's the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. It's more of a repressive thing, and do's and don'ts, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, we all come to stuff based on our background, and if you've had a parent or some authority figure in your life where it's been set up in terms of do's and don'ts, that was your schooling or something, that's naturally going to be the place you go to. And also as human beings, we have a strong sense of justice. I mean, there comes a point very early in a child's life when they feel that was unjust, you shouldn't have done that.
My son says constantly, "That's unfair."
Yeah, you got it, right? And that's kind of where we go.
Very often not, I might add.
But I think if you go back to that original story about the trees in the garden, there's actually two ways of life. You can live according to the tree of life, or you can live according to the knowledge of good and evil. I think if you go down the good and evil road, it leads to death. So I think a lot of people think that's what the Bible's about, but it ain't.
What is it about then?
Well, it's pretty clear. I take the view that the story of Jesus written by a guy called John, who I think was actually Jesus' official biographer, put in inverted commas. He's thought about this for a long time. He's been in a place called Ephesus, in modern Turkey. Some people might have been there on a trip. Kind of the cultural centre of the Roman world. He's had a lot of time to think about this, and he knows his job is to translate what Jesus is saying to the people in a different culture. And what he talks about over and over again is eternal life. That's what's on offer. I've come to bring you life. And it's not, I've come to bring you a new set of rules. Then people say, rightly, well, what about unfair? What about goodness and all that kind of stuff? And my answer would be, well, if the life of God is flowing through someone, it's naturally going to be for the good. But if you focus on the good and evil thing, you're going to miss it. That'll end up crushing life. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Wonder if you could tell us the way in which this story, this biblical story, has shaped your own life.
Yeah. Well, you're looking for answers, you're trying to work out your way in the world, and you realise you're a finite human being and you really can't do it. The whole Western philosophical tradition is now kind of imploded into postmodernity, and we realise, on the basis of your own reason, you can't even prove that mathematics is self-consistent. You can't prove that it's wrong to torture a child for entertainment. Stanley Fish says that. So limits of human reason. Okay, so I'm going to try this book and see what it says. And a couple of things it says. First of all, creation is God's temple. Well, how do you treat a temple? Well, you honour it. You don't worship it, but you respect it. It's holy, it's sacred. And you see it all as gift. It's a beautiful thing. So it's going to sound odd here, but my taste buds are a gift. My sight is a gift. So when I have a cup of coffee, and you make great coffees in Sydney, I have to say, for me, this is almost a moment of worship. I don't worship the coffee, but I give thanks because of it. This is all gift, right? And when you see people made in God's image, it's the same kind of thing. So that's really changed my life. When I approach people, my encounter with a person at that point is the most important thing in the universe in one sense, to treat them well. I know that might sound a bit zen-ish. I'm sorry how it sounds, but it's actually just great. It's nice not to have to be the moral policeman of the universe anymore.
You're listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity.
My guest today is Professor Rikk Watts from Regent College in Vancouver. Rikk, you worked for some time among the urban poor, providing accommodation and rehabilitation programs and so on. What did that experience teach you about the human condition?
First thing it taught me is that I can't fix this. Life is too big for me to put my arms around. I can maybe put my arms around one person and do what I can. All the nice little programs about 7 steps, they're a nice little rubric to get started on, but it's much more like jazz. You have to improvise with people, improvise in a very serious way, right? So you need to hear where they're coming from. And actually, that's one of the things I love about the story of Jesus you find in John, because every person he meets, like this heavyweight intellectual leader, Jesus says to him, the issue is not what you know. Are you willing to change? Other end of the scale, there's a woman who's had a whole bunch of failed relationships, and he addresses her at a different point. So one of the things I learn about working with people at that particular place is you really have to be incarnate into their lives. You've got to listen to them. And it just, in the end, they also make some choices. You can offer people all kinds of things and people still say no in the end and go back to, and others don't. Others say, yep, I'm ready to change, and they'll embrace it.
There's a good story to be told as well, isn't there? And the way Christians have embraced that sort of compassionate life, it's profound. It's a story that needs to be told, right?
Oh, absolutely. You might be familiar with this book written by Rodney Stark, one of North America's foremost sociologists, published by Princeton University Press and written as a non-Christian. And he'd been told, as many people are, religion's just an epiphenomenon, it's not a real thing, doesn't change much. And he just basically said, oh, come on, hogwash, let's just look at the impact of this. So I think I'll have a look at Christianity. That's been the big one in the West. And he sometimes he doesn't understand what makes Christians tick, which is fair enough. You've got to be on the inside to know some of that stuff. So I'm not criticising him for that. But he looks at the data and it's just extraordinary. He talks about in these terribly fractured ancient cities that were really violent, these new communities began. We could sit around a table, which is what you do with friends, and it didn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, it didn't matter about your race, your gender, or your social status. You all sat around the one table, which in the ancient world is astonishing. So you get Paul saying things like, in Christ there is no male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile. This is unbelievable because he's really the first person in human history, in the West at least, to separate the idea of showing dignity to someone from their race, from their gender, and from their social status. Now that's incredibly liberating.
The Centre for Public Christianity, Beyond Religion.
We're talking first, second century stuff. It had a big impact, didn't it? There were big changes that came through Christian action.
Yep. And it happened really at the one-on-one level. So, for example, you're approaching an ancient city. There'd be a rubbish dump on the outside of it, and often just one-day-old babies discarded on the rubbish dump. And, there's birds and dogs. You can just fill in the blanks. There'd be slavers looking for new product, maybe owners of houses of prostitution looking for... And then you'd find a new group there, Christians. Right? And they would be taking these kids into their homes and looking after them because actually they're made in God's image. They had real value. One of the things that the pagans get really upset about is the extraordinary generosity of Christians. And one of them, Lucian, complains, these people, they give to anybody. Their teacher put it into their heads that we were all brothers and you should care for one another. He just thinks this is the most ridiculous thing. But you know what I've discovered, though? People, it's really amazing, astonishing even, people actually like to be treated well. Go figure.
And it has a massive impact, right?
Yeah, and they did it without resorting to any kind of, there's no military violence at that point. The empire's against them. They don't have big radio stations. There's no kind of CPX, right? They do this in their local communities, and people just are attracted to this.
I often try to think through Christianity's influence on the West, and that idea of the status of each individual being in the image of God is a key one, right? What does that mean to be made in the image of God, and what are the implications of it?
I have a friend who did a PhD at Harvard, Catherine Beckerleg, and had 4 kids in the process. So amazing. She studied this. And basically a couple of things come out of it. First of all, an image is always meant to be three-dimensional. It can't just be reason. It's got to be embodied. An image is actually a stargate. What's a stargate? It's a way in which the God becomes present to the earth. So when ancient people made idols, they go through the process of opening its eyes, ears, mouths and limbs, right? And then they'd invite the spirit of the God into the image, the ritual process. And when that happened, they would actually believe the image was the presence of the God upon the earth, right? So that's what's going on in the pagan world. And in this biblical story, God says, no, you don't make an image of me. I made you in my image, which means human beings are actually designed to be the physical manifestation of God to the world. So the big question then is, well, what does this God look like? And that's what the biblical narrative is on about, right? I'm not a God like you think I am. This incredible compassion, mercy. Not that he's a pushover. God's pretty serious about injustice, right? Including my own injustice, not somebody else's. But ultimately, at the end of all of that is incredible compassion. And that's what people are called to live out.
So we're not gods, but we carry the image of and to represent God.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the New Testament will talk about being filled with the Holy Spirit, and that's this kind of the living Spirit of God, his life in people. And that's why it's not about being good and bad. It's about life, because, I'm 60, I look in the mirror and I know I'm starting to fade away, except around my waist. But, I know I'm in the process of dying because I don't have life within me. And the great story of Jesus is that actually this guy came through, and it's not about good or bad, but he defeated death. And my job then, if you like job, who I am, not a job, but who I am, is to bring life to people when I'm with them.
Now, it seems that the notion of freedom in the West these days has become sort of unlimited choice. Don't tell me what to do. That's very different from the biblical picture. What does the biblical idea of freedom mean?
Yeah, let me just come before that. You mentioned when I was going through my earlier training, I came pretty close to losing my faith, and I did, in fact. I was at a university and sitting there one day and just thought, you know what, I can't really answer all of this in terms of the engineering scientific terms I'd grown up with, so I thought I'm going to let it go and convert to paganism. That was my decision. And this is going to sound really hokey, but I discovered that you could smoke an unfiltered Camel cigarette with a strong cup of coffee, and you have you'd be high as a kite, and it was legal. My big rebellion. So I'm sitting there one day in the university doing this, and I just had this incredible experience where I sensed I was in this vast plain, and there were all these fences that I'd grown up with, and they all started to fall over, and I felt this incredible exhilaration, right, freedom. But it didn't stop. They just kept going and receding into the distance. And then this moment of terrible vertigo hit me. If there are no boundaries, there's no centres. And if there's no centres, you're nowhere. And I think that was the beginning of realising, we cannot in and of ourselves sustain where we are. So real freedom actually for a human being is learning who you are, I think, in the scheme of things. And the scheme of things is that I'm not designed to be able to embrace the whole world. I'm not interested in absolute knowledge. It doesn't help me, I can't get it. Freedom is, in fact, to know myself in relationship to God and other people. And freedom, then, is freedom to bring life to you.
Rikk Watts, great getting some wisdom from you on all of that, and I appreciate you coming in to chat about it. Thanks so much.
My great pleasure.
For more Christian perspective on contemporary life, publicchristianity.org.